In the next few minutes, we'll journey through the storm-lashed waters of the Drake Passage, the only place on Earth where the ocean circles the planet uninterrupted. More than 800 ships and 10,000 sailors have been claimed by these waters, a reminder of just how dangerous they remain. This is where the Antarctic circumpolar current flows freely around the globe, shaping climate while creating seas few can survive. You'll see how geology forged it, how shipwrecks marked it, and how explorers battled it. To understand its human cost, we must first uncover how nature built this passage. Long before ships ever confronted its fury, the Drake Passage began as a slow transformation deep inside the planet. Between roughly 17 and 49 million years ago, South America and Antarctica were still joined by land. For countless ages, this barrier stopped any flow of water between the Pacific and the Atlantic. Then tectonic forces began pulling the continents apart. As they drifted, a channel opened where solid ground once stood. What began as a gap gradually widened into a corridor for the sea, a gateway that we now know as the Drake Passage. It may not have appeared dramatic at the time, but that continental break triggered changes that reshaped not only Antarctica, but the entire climate system of Earth. Once that opening existed, the ocean surged through it. Pacific waters began spilling eastward into the Atlantic, and over millions of years, this movement built the most powerful current on the planet, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, or ACC. Unlike other currents, which are eventually blocked by land, the ACC can circle the globe endlessly with no obstacles. Driven by unbroken winds, this flow became a continuous conveyor of cold water spinning around Antarctica. It carries more water than all the rivers on Earth combined, reaching deep into the ocean and connecting the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian basins in one massive system. The creation of this current locked Antarctica into isolation. Once cut off from warmer waters, the continent cooled until permanent ice sheets formed. For millions of years, that ice has stored most of the world's fresh water and altered sea levels across the globe. The ACC does more than freeze Antarctica. It regulates climate far beyond it. By stirring nutrients from the deep sea, it feeds ecosystems stretching into distant oceans. It also shifts heat away from the tropics and toward the poles, balancing temperatures that every other region depends on. Without this constant circulation, Earth's environments, from farmland to fish stocks, would look very different. Yet what stabilizes the planet also builds danger at the surface. In the Drake Passage, the ACC collides with a bottleneck barely 600 miles wide, squeezed between South America's southern tip and the Antarctic Peninsula. Here, the current is compressed and accelerated, colliding with winds that sweep around the globe without interruption. The result is seas that are both unpredictable and extreme. Waves commonly rise to about 30 feet, and rare swells have been recorded near 65 feet, enough to tower over even modern ships. Crossing this stretch is never routine. Some days the waters appear deceptively smooth, a state seafarers call the Drake Lake. But calm can vanish within hours, turning the same passage into the Drake Shake, a maelstrom of violent motion and towering waves. There are no natural barriers here to soften the impact. No protective islands scatter the force. No channels break up the current's rhythm. Winds, storms, and raw ocean energy combine in a place that seems designed to test every ship that dares enter. Sailors often describe the experience less as traveling across an ocean and more as enduring the planet's full physics concentrated in one place. The lack of mercy is universal. Wooden vessels of the age of sail, steel warships, and even today's engineered liners all confront the same overwhelming conditions. The Drake Passage stands as proof that geology and climate do not act in isolation. A tectonic shift millions of years ago opened this gateway. The Antarctic Circumpolar Current raced through it, freezing a continent and shaping global weather. But in this narrow corridor, the same forces that sustain life elsewhere on Earth transform into an ordeal for anyone at sea. And that ordeal did not remain an abstract concept. It became a lived reality. When sailors first braved the passage centuries ago, they faced waters that had been building in strength for millions of years. Many never returned, and their losses would give the Drake its grim reputation as the sea that eats ships. Over the centuries, sailors came to know these waters by a chilling name, the sea that eats ships. More than 800 vessels and over 10,000 sailors are said to have been lost here, a number that illustrates why the Drake Passage became a proving ground for survival. To sail into its storms was to wager lives against geography itself. The first glimpses of this region by Europeans came not through ambition, but accident. In 1525, the Spanish navigator Francisco de Oces was pushed far south by a violent storm and reported open waters below Cape Horn. His accounts suggested that seas extended farther than maps of the time allowed. Later, in 1578, Francis Drake's fleet was also driven southward while raiding Spanish ships. The sight of unbroken ocean to the south of South America proved the point beyond doubt. Neither man sought discovery, yet their forced encounters revealed a gateway where the Atlantic and Pacific collided, and both left records that marked the Drake Passage as dangerous and unpredictable from the beginning. The years that followed provided tragic confirmation of just how perilous this channel was. In 1819, the Spanish warship San Telmo departed with 644 men aboard, bound for battle in the Pacific. Somewhere in the Drake Passage, the ship disappeared entirely. No survivors returned, and no wreckage was found. Some fragments of timber were later spotted near the South Shetland Islands, leading to speculation the sailors might have washed ashore on Antarctica itself. If even a handful survived, they could have been the first humans to set foot on the continent, decades before official expeditions. The mystery has never been resolved, and the fate of the San Telmo lingers as one of the most haunting what-ifs in maritime history. Another story underscored that the danger extended far beyond sinking ships. In 1741, the British vessel HMS Wager ran aground after being separated from its fleet in a storm. The wreck left around 120 men stranded on a remote island near Chile. Supplies dwindled, tempers cracked, and authority collapsed. Mutiny broke out, men fought among themselves, and the group splintered apart. Out of the entire crew, only 10 managed to make it back to England. The Wager tragedy revealed a truth as punishing as any storm. Survival here depended not only on navigation and luck, but on whether human beings could hold together when stripped of order and hope. Given such relentless danger, why did ships continue to brave the passage? The answer was geography and necessity. The Drake Passage offered a direct route between the Atlantic and Pacific, saving valuable time compared to sailing around Africa or through northern waters. For empires hungry for trade and expansion, the risks were outweighed by the potential profit. Captains and crews understood the price, but they also knew that turning away meant losing strategic and economic advantage. Even in calm weather, the crossing offered no guarantees. Powerful eddies spun ships off course. Icebergs drifted silently into shipping lanes, massive and almost unseen until too late. Storm waves, pushed higher by the relentless circumpolar winds, loomed over wooden hulls that could be broken apart in an instant. Some voyages passed without event and fueled myths that the channel could be conquered. But just as often, a ship vanished into absence, leaving behind little more than a name in lost cargo lists. The Drake Passage forged its legend not out of one catastrophe, but through centuries of accumulated loss. Its storms, ice, and currents carved fear into those who faced it, while ambition and desperation ensured fresh crews kept returning. Each ship that entered took part in an unspoken gamble between human ingenuity and the raw force of nature. Some staggered through battered but intact. Others became cautionary stories whispered in every port. And yet, not every peril here came from waves and wreckage. While storms shredded some vessels to pieces, others were not broken at all, but caught in a different kind of trap. Instead of sinking beneath the sea, they became frozen into it, locked in place, prisoners of the ice that surrounds Antarctica. What happened to those crews reveals another kind of ordeal, one measured not in hours of violence, but in months of waiting. Some ships in the Drake Passage were destroyed in storms, but others faced a slower, more suffocating struggle. One of the most famous examples was the Belgica, a small Belgian vessel that set out in 1897 under the command of Adrien de Gerlache. The expedition's aim was bold, to explore and map uncharted reaches of Antarctica. After weeks of charting coastlines and forcing its way south, the ship entered heavy pack ice beyond the Drake Passage. By early 1898, the crew realized the truth. They were trapped. The Belgica would become the first expedition in history to spend a full winter locked in Antarctica. The crew's confinement was absolute. As the polar night began, sunlight disappeared for months. Darkness lay across the ice in an unbroken stretch, while the ship creaked under the constant pressure of frozen seas. Temperatures dropped so far that frost formed on blankets, walls, and even within their breath. Wooden beams groaned each day against the crushing grip outside. What had begun as a mission of exploration turned into a desperate test of endurance. For the men trapped inside, the greatest enemy soon became their own failing health. With no access to fresh vegetables or fruit, scurvy spread quickly. Muscles weakened, joints locked, and teeth loosened. Men lay in hammocks, unable to move. The mental toll was just as severe. Depression sank into the cramped quarters. Arguments flared over small matters, paranoia spread, and the loss of light made despair hard to escape. Within months, 2 members of the crew were dead. For those who remained alive, survival now depended on sheer will and on the actions of one man. Among those aboard were 2 figures who would later leave their mark on polar history. Roald Amundsen, still a young officer, watched and learned lessons he would one day apply as the first man to reach the South Pole. Another, Dr. Frederick Cook, served as the expedition's physician. Though later remembered for controversial claims, here Cook was decisive. As the crew collapsed into weakness, he forced men to eat raw penguin and seal meat. The idea was met with disgust, but Cook insisted that only uncooked flesh contained the nutrients needed to fight scurvy. Those who followed his orders slowly regained strength. Those who resisted grew worse. His measure did not solve every hardship, but it made the difference between life and death for many. Even as their health stabilized, the psychological weight of confinement lingered. Endless darkness blurred the sense of time. Men carved routines into the days, making crude projects and filling journals to hold together some form of purpose. Still, uncertainty shadowed everything. When the sun finally rose again in spring, the relief of light gave them little real hope. The Belgica was still locked tight in ice, unable to move. They were alive, but stranded. It was then that Gerlach ordered something few had attempted before, carving their own route to freedom. With saws, picks, and explosives, the men began cutting through the ice. It became back-breaking, monotonous labor, stretching over weeks. The channel they forced was not shallow or short. It stretched for over a mile, hacked painstakingly forward 1 frozen yard at a time. Hands blistered, spirits frayed, yet progress grew visible. At last, the ship shifted, groaning as the ice gave way, and slowly edged into open water. After more than a year in captivity, the Belgica had escaped. Their ordeal became a milestone, remembered as the first human overwintering in Antarctica. It showed that survival here was never simply about strength of ships, but about persistence, ingenuity, and mental resolve. 2 men were lost. yet others lived by adapting, even when adaptation meant eating raw meat in the dark. In the recorded history of the Drake Passage, the Belgica proved that silence and isolation could be as deadly as storms. But what happens when a ship doesn't escape at all? When it's destroyed completely, leaving nothing but ice underfoot and a hostile sea ahead? If the Belgica tested the limits of patience, another expedition soon tested the very possibility of survival. If they escaped, what would come after? What if your ship has vanished beneath the ice, and the only ground you have left is drifting floes that can break at any moment? That was the nightmare Ernest Shackleton and his men faced during the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition between 1914 and 1917. Their original goal had been ambitious, the first land crossing of Antarctica. But before they could even set foot across the continent, their ship, the Endurance, became trapped in the pack ice of the Weddell Sea. For weeks the timbers groaned and split under pressure until the vessel tore apart and sank, leaving Shackleton's crew stranded on the frozen ocean. Now 27 men were left adrift without shelter or a path forward. They lived for months on shifting ice, their tents pitched on unstable floes that cracked beneath them. The ice carried them farther from land and deeper into uncertainty. Food was reduced to what they could salvage from the wreck or catch on the floes. Penguins, seals, anything that could be skinned and roasted if fuel allowed, or eaten raw when it didn't. The bitter cold, the monotony, and the slow weakening of the men turned daily life into a waiting game against exhaustion. By early 1916, Shackleton knew rescue would never come to them. The drift of the pack was too slow, and starvation too certain. He resolved to gamble on an all but impossible attempt. Shackleton chose 5 companions, loaded one of the lifeboats salvaged from the Endurance, the James Caird, and set course for South Georgia Island, nearly 800 miles away. If they reached it, they might find help at the whaling stations there. If they failed, not only would the 6 men perish, but the 21 left behind on Elephant Island would have no hope of survival. Shackleton was gambling the fate of every man on this one desperate voyage. The crossing began in April. The James Caird was small, open, and unsuited to weeks at sea. Yet for 16 days, it was their only chance. Shackleton and his 5 men fought the Drake Passage in conditions no vessel of that size was thought able to survive. Navigation was almost impossible. Clouds swallowed the sky, and sun sightings to use with the sextant came rarely, often separated by days. Most of the time, they steered on instinct through seas that towered around them. Every minute was an assault, the boat filled with icy spray that froze into their clothes. Salt water turned to crusts of ice on their beards and hoods. They bailed constantly, their hands raw from rope and freezing water. Rest was impossible except for short, damp dozes between watches. They rowed, steered, and clung to the little boat while hurricane-force winds and currents pressed them off course. Hunger gnawed in equal measure with the cold, but still the men rowed when Shackleton asked for more. After more than 2 weeks of this punishment, land appeared at last. The jagged peaks of South Georgia rose on the horizon. Shackleton and his crew had done what few imagined was possible. They had crossed the stormiest water on Earth in a small open boat and found their mark. But their ordeal was not over. Landing on the wrong side of the island, they were forced into a final trial, trekking for days across mountains and glaciers no person had crossed before to reach the whaling station. From there, Shackleton turned quickly to what he saw as his unfinished duty, saving the others still marooned on Elephant Island. After several failed attempts blocked by ice, he finally broke through the pack with a borrowed ship. When he stepped ashore to meet his crew, every man he had left behind was still alive. Against every reasonable expectation, not a single life was lost after more than 500 days stranded in the Antarctic. Shackleton's feat showed that survival in the Drake Passage was never simply about strength or navigation. It was about leadership, unity, and the will to endure. Here, where storms and ice seem designed to erase human presence, he proved that resilience can match even the harshest forces of nature. It is this balance between the raw power of the sea and the resolve of those who face it that brings us to a larger question about what the Drake Passage represents. The Drake Passage shows that nature's force is more than storms and ice. It is a test of how people respond when every resource is stripped to the edge. Across centuries, crews endured loss, fought despair, and survived only through leadership, ingenuity, and stubborn will. The lesson is not about conquest, but about endurance. Even now, this passage remains less something to defeat than something to face. At best, you pass through it, carrying its stories with you. If you want more real survival mysteries, subscribe to the Dreamland Xpress, and let us know in the comments which story surprised you most.